Cold Fingers by R. Chetwynd-Hayes. Paul Etherington examined the old house, noted its dilapidated condition, and pulled the old-fashioned bell handle. The advertisement had said, "Ideal accommodation for healthy young man." He was extremely healthy and in desperate need of accommodation. He had already been interviewed by several landladies who had stressed the impeccable respectability of their establishments. Now he had come to the old house that stood in the midst of an untidy garden, waiting for a weather-grimed door to open. Slow footsteps came from a long way off. The door slid open a bare 6 inches. A long nose, surmounted by a pair of black eyes, appeared around the edge, and an old, harsh voice inquired, "Yes, who is it?" Paul cleared his throat and shuffled his feet. "I've come in answer to the advertisement in the Comet." The eyes took on a deeper gleam. The nose appeared to twitch. "Are you healthy?" The word healthy was drawn out, as though the speaker was reluctant to part with it. "Yes, I think so." "Have you nerves?" "Well, and hasn't everyone?" The door flew back open, and one of the most extraordinary-looking old women that Paul had ever seen stood, outlined against a dimly lit hall, examining him with critical interest. She had the shoulders of a long, retired prize-fighter, a narrow skull that was flanked on either side by tufts of white hair tied with black ribbon, a high forehead not enhanced by a receding hairline, and a thin mouth that was almost lost amidst an intricate network of wrinkles. A long black dress, made from some thick material, draped the flat body from neck to ankle, whilst coils of amber beads dangled down to a little below the waist, like crystallized gobbets of honey. Although the voice was harsh, it had a cultivated quality. "You look healthy, and, more important, strong. Neither do you appear to have nerves, but I'm aware that appearances can be deceptive. You may enter." As she closed the door behind him, a cloying atmosphere that had something to do with central heating and warm damp closed in on him. The hall was large, a place of faded red wallpaper, green doors, and a staircase which meandered up to a landing that surrounded the room on 3 sides. His attention was abruptly brought back to the old woman, who asked, "What is your name?" Paul Etherington." "You may call me Miss Partridge. Now, Mr. Etherington, if you will be so kind as to follow me, I will conduct you to your room." Despite her ancient appearance, Miss Partridge ran up the stairs, once actually taking 2 steps at a time. When they reached the landing, she led her prospective paying guest round to the left-hand wing and opened the 3rd door. "I think you will find this to be reasonably comfortable." Paul moved forward into the room, then stopped. It was large, well, even luxuriously furnished, and very neat. The mahogany wardrobe and dressing-table gleamed with frequent applications of polish. The thick red carpet must have been vacuumed but an hour since. The blue bedspread was as smooth as a frozen lake. Paul stared with well-nigh speechless astonishment at the 2 deep armchairs, the electric fire, and the old paintings that decorated the walls. "The door in the left-hand corner," Miss Partridge said, "leads to a bathroom and other offices." Paul sighed. "It's absolutely marvellous, but I'm sure it will be too expensive for me." Miss Partridge frowned. "I find monetary discussion quite distasteful. Shall we say £2 a week?" £2? Paul gasped. "Full board, of course," Miss Partridge added. "My cooking has never been questioned." "But, very well. I never haggle. £150 a week, payable when convenient. When can you move in?" At once, I suppose. My case is at the station." "A meal will be waiting for you on your return," Miss Partridge said. "Well, don't just stand there. The sun sets early at this time of year." Paul had collected his case, unpacked it, and stored his few possessions, and was now in the dining-room, greedily eating braised steak and boiled potatoes. Miss Partridge, who ate little herself, presided from the far end of the table. "I like to see a young man with an appetite. That usually denotes an uncomplicated mind, and no nerves worth mentioning. I gather you are a student of something?" "Yes, I have a grant to study archaeology. I'm writing a thesis on the Neolithic diggings just outside town." "The past is a land populated by the dead," Miss Partridge announced. "An explorer should be very careful where his feet wander. For sweet, I have prepared an excellent orange pudding. I trust you will partake." "Yes, thank you." The college pudding was taken from a heated food trolley, and Paul had eaten more than his fair share when he asked a question which had been knocking at the door of his mind for some time. "Are we alone in the house?" Miss Partridge appeared to give the matter more thought than it merited. "I think I can safely say," she added at last, "that we are the only people living in this house at the present time. Why, do you imagine I will try to take advantage of you?" "No, of course not." "For myself," Miss Partridge went on, "the prospect of being assaulted by a young man has long passed into the realms of what might have been. May I tempt you with a cup of coffee?" "Oh, yes, thank you, yes, indeed." "You surrender to the dictates of temptation very easily. That suggests a lack of moral fibre. White or black?" "White, please." "Now I detect a certain lack of adventurous spirit, a desire to dilute reality with sentiment. Do you drink strong waters?" "Pardon?" "Granted. Do you imbibe intoxicating liquor?" "Oh, no, never." Miss Partridge sighed. "Oh, pity. Alcohol can often serve as a prop for a shattered soul." "Never mind. A teetotaler must, if I may be permitted the expression, be totally lacking in imagination, and under the circumstances that is a definite asset. Now, I should imagine you have academic work which needs a paramount claim on your time." "Well, I ought to get down to it, yes," Paul admitted. "Then be off, and do not work too late. Remember that an hour's sleep before midnight is worth 2 after. My room is only 2 doors down, and I will hear if you scream." "What?" Miss Partridge managed to blush. A dull, red wave of colour crept up through the network of wrinkles, and made Paul think of blood seeping from an open wound. She actually giggled. "What a stupid mistake! Why on earth would you scream? A strong young man with no nerves worth mentioning." "Cabbages and parsnips! Whatever was I thinking of? I meant, of course, should you require anything. A single, not over-loud call will arouse me in a moment. I am a light sleeper. Are you?" "No," Paul confessed. "My mother says I sleep like the dead." "That is indeed fortunate. Not that in my experience the dead sleep all that soundly. Good night, Mr. Etherington. All being well, breakfast will be served at 8 o'clock. A soft thud jerked Paul back from the brink of sleep, made him sit up and look around the room with wide-open eyes. He gasped, "What's that?" Then sank back against the pillow, where he saw a heavy book lying on the bedside rug. It must have slipped from his fingers just as sleep was closing in, and therefore the sudden, unexplainable fear had no foundation in fact. He picked up the book and placed it on the bedside table, and then, with firm determination, turned out the light and slid down between the sheets. His eyes closed. One sense had been, so to speak, disconnected. As there was no sound, his hearing shrugged allegorical shoulders and called it a day. His heart and lungs perceptibly slowed down. His nerve grid relaxed and relayed final orders to the brain's complicated empire. Toes uncurled, fingers went limp, lips parted, muscles sagged. Then something happened that sent the alarm bells ringing, brought the body back to nerve-shrieking awareness. Paul felt cold, cold fingers gently caressing his throat. For a while he could not move, but lay quite still, savouring an experience that was unique in its enormity. The fingers, apart from being very cold, were solid, and most certainly owed nothing to imagination. 4 digits were on the left of his windpipe, and a thumb was moving slowly up and down on the right. At first the pressure was light, then there was a gradual tightening, a pressing down by the thumb, a gentle digging of fingertips. Paul suddenly remembered that a voice had a basic use, and he screamed. For a young man who had never screamed before, he did a very good job. Had he been in more of a rational state of mind, he might have marvelled that his throat was capable of such a long, drawn-out, not to mention loud, sound. He was filling his lungs with air prior to making a fresh, and in some respects improved effort, when the door opened, and overhead the light flashed on to reveal Miss Partridge attired in a red dressing-gown and a lace-trimmed cap. She advanced towards the bed and smiled. "Unless I'm greatly mistaken, young man, you screamed. In my experience, a scream denotes sudden fear. Now why should a healthy young man be afraid?" Paul was struggling to sit up. I felt cold fingers press on my throat." Miss Partridge raised her voice and uttered each word with slow precision. "Cold fingers on the throat. Am I to understand you are afraid of a few cold fingers on the throat? Why, when I was a young girl, a horrible thing dropped onto my shoulders, and I did not utter a sound, but waited patiently for dear papa to recite a suitable incantation. Young people nowadays do lack backbone. After some rapid deliberation, Paul decided enough was sufficient, and retreat the best means of defence. He pushed back the bedclothes and swung his legs over the bed edge. Miss Partridge raised her voice in protest. "Are you aware, Mr. Etherington, you are clad in night attire, and I am a maiden, a lady of advanced years?" "Then get out," Paul instructed, "while I get dressed. I'd rather sleep on the common than spend another minute in this place." "Am I to understand you are a coward?" "Bright yellow. Oh, yes." Miss Partridge, with surprising strength, grabbed his ankles, pushed his legs back onto the bed, then pulled the sheets and blankets up about his neck. As an added security measure, she sat on the bed and placed a restraining hand on his chest. "Now listen to me, Mr. Etherington. As a strong, healthy young man with no nerves to speak of, you have little to fear. I will admit there may be something, a trifling disturbance in this room that may or may not have a penchant for placing cold fingers on the odd throat. The dead have their little peculiarities." Far from being comforted by this statement, Paul began to struggle, and it took some small effort on Miss Partridge's part to restrain him. She sighed gently. "Really, you are most tiresome, Mr. Etherington. Will you kindly lie still and listen to me? But are you going to do as I say, or must I use more restrictive measures?" There was a gleam in the little eyes that quelled any further objections on Paul's part, and he relapsed into a sulky silence. "Now," Miss Partridge removed her hand and made herself as comfortable as circumstances permitted, "you must understand that mine is, to say the least, an unusual family. One of my cousins formed an alliance with a known vampire, and their issue is best left undescribed. Are you going to be tiresome again?" Paul discontinued his futile struggles and prayed for the blessed gift of disbelief. "My dear papa," Miss Partridge went on, "although a most excellent man in every other respect, had a weakness for what I can only describe as low company. On occasion he brought them home. The low company, I mean. Little men with white faces and fingernails that were longer than is conversant with good taste. Then, of course, there was his unfortunate hobby." Paul experienced a certain morbid curiosity. "Hobby? Yes, raising the dead. Oh, there are occasions when this can be considered a fairly harmless pastime, and no doubt if dear papa had confined himself to bringing up nice people, all would have been well. But this weakness for low company was his, and, alas, our undoing. Are you unwell? You have developed a rather strange look." Paul muttered something that sounded very like "nutty, mad as a cracked walnut," and started a passionate love affair with the open door. Miss Partridge laid ungentle fingers on his arm, then continued her discourse. "I have never professed to understand the procedure he used, but suffice to say it was very effective. He did not, of course, bring up their bodies. That would have been the height of bad taste, and so smelly. No, using the ectoplasm provided by Great-Aunt Martha, of which I may add she had an unlimited supply, papa called up murderers, pickpockets, ladies of easy virtue, dear mamma was shocked into an early grave, who slithered, slunk, and gibbered round this very room, and caused all but dear papa deep distress. I want to go to the bathroom," Paul said. "You can't." "Not until I have finished. Kindly practice self-control. Now, where was I? They were all slithering, slinking, and gibbering. Oh, indeed they were. I am pleased to learn you were paying attention, yes. But they all went back to where they came from when dear papa said, 'Scram-rouge.'" "Scram-rouge," Paul replied. "Well, there's a good boy, all but one. An executed murderer who was buried at the crossroads. Crossroads. There's no need to repeat everything I say. On that particular day, Great-Aunt Martha was well charged with ectoplasm, the result possibly of consuming half a bottle of old port, and the creature became as solid as a 74 bus. I am given to understand that they are very solid. Well, if you meet one head-on, it is." Paul agreed. "And he just would not go away. Dear papa said scram-rouge until he was quite hoarse, but to no avail. Then we found out why the low creature was hanged. I suppose you have formed an opinion. Throats?" Paul suggested. "Precisely. You see, the wretched creature just couldn't wait to get back to its former occupation. Poor dear papa, in this very bed, had his throat, and passed into a beyond, from which he has never returned. There have been other unfortunate incidents over the years, the details of which might cause you distress were I to relate them." Miss Partridge sighed deeply. "Also unnecessary. I was a silly goose not to think of it before. You see, all that is required is a strong young man who can squeeze back." "Good God! Don't blaspheme. There is one point you may find of interest. The low creature cannot materialize when the lights are on. I will, of course, turn them off from the mains." Paul began to pull at the bedclothes, a source of action which did not meet with Miss Partridge's full approval. She produced a wicked little automatic pistol from her dressing-gown pocket and poked it in the young man's groin. He became as still as a rabbit that had spotted an ill-intentioned stoat. "I am reluctant to cause you any discomfort," Miss Partridge said, "but I shall not hesitate to do so if there is any more nonsense now." She looked inquiringly round the room. "I think all is as it should be, all windows barred, key on the outside door, yes. I really think the time has come, as my dear papa used to say, to cut the chat and get down to our muttons. Let us hope you do not become the mutton. Just my little joke." Paul frantically sought for words that would delay her departure and bring about a change of mind. Miss Partridge had risen from the bed and was backing across the room, the automatic still pointing in the general direction of his groin, when what he considered to be a reasonable topic for conversation came galloping over his brain. But how can I squeeze the throat of a ghost?" "A solid ghost, dear. I did explain that. The traumatic shock of having his throat firmly squeezed should send him into immediate and permanent dissolution. Such, at any rate, is my dearest desire. A squeeze in time saves 9. Having delivered these last words, Miss Partridge spun round with remarkable alacrity, tripped out to the landing, and slammed the door before Paul had time to make any further objections. He heard the key being turned, then the sound of footsteps running down the stairs, which suggested the pleasurable excitement had at least temporarily loosened the chains of age. Paul leapt out of bed and ran for the door, where he kicked the panels and pulled the handle, the result of optimism ignoring the dictates of common sense. The door was made from seasoned oak, and the lock was clearly a stout mortise that would never surrender to mere muscle power. Presently he gave up and went back to bed, panic gradually shrinking to shimmering dread. Then the need to find a prosaic explanation for a bizarre situation enabled him to line up some morale-boosting conjectures. He listed them. A. The old hag is mad. B. There is no such thing as a ghost, and if there were, it wouldn't be able to squeeze throats. C. Therefore, the cold fingers must either have been the old hag herself, trying to frighten the life out of me, or, and now Paul could not entirely suppress a shudder, someone else who is hidden in this room. A large wardrobe with a long mirror smirked from the facing wall. Long blue velvet curtains stirred imperceptibly, and thus created an impression they might be hiding any number of cold-fingered madmen. Then the lights went out, and terror rushed in from all sides and crashed through the carefully erected barricades of reasonable conjecture. Paul peered anxiously from left to right. The darkness was complete, an impregnable wall of blackness that was not relieved by so much as a glimmer. He shouted, "Come on, you don't frighten me." But there was no comforting reassurance from the sound of his own voice. It was too high-pitched and had a hysterical quality that might well develop into a scream and completely belie his brave words. An unexpected answer came from behind the locked door. "Don't worry, dear. He will come, but you may have to cultivate a little patience." Miss Partridge had, as it were, taken her seat in the stalls and was waiting for the performance to begin. Paul sent out a fear-inspired and totally unrealistic demand. "Open the door, you mad old bitch!" Miss Partridge was clearly shocked by this ungallant language, and clearly expressed her displeasure in no uncertain words. "That is no way for a gentleman to address a lady." To say I am surprised is a gross understatement. When you are more yourself, always supposing all goes well, I will expect an apology." Paul attempted to appeal to the eternal mother instinct, which he had always been given to understand is every woman's birthright. "Suppose whoever or whatever is in here kills me?" The harsh old voice was so gentle, so soothing. "I have a nice little plot prepared in the cellar. You won't be lonely. But I do so hope it won't be necessary. A young man of your size will be most difficult to drag down the stairs." His conversational powers ran dry. Silence became part of the darkness, and clogged his ears with dry velvet. Imagination created thought images that danced across the brain and took on the grotesque shapes of long-forgotten childhood fears. Suddenly, the silence crumbled, as a series of loud raps went hopping, Paul could think of no better description, around the walls and terminated on the headboard. The eerie sounds appeared to have no connection with a ghost with a penchant for squeezing throats, and Paul was at a loss to account for this phenomenon, until the whispering voice of Miss Partridge supplied a possible explanation. "That must be one of the good spirits trying to warn you that something nasty is about to happen. A nice thought that helps to restore one's faith in those who have gone before us. Now, I would suggest you curve your hands in readiness, because the low creature will be at your throat any time now." Paul was not comforted by this statement, and made a few interesting noises while he strained his ears and peered into the thick darkness, and waved his hands wildly, hoping to ward off whatever might have designs on his windpipe. Then, somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, his right hand was imprisoned in a soft grip, and fear took on another dimension. He could feel the cold, smooth palm, the seemingly boneless fingers that gently caressed, and the large thumb that clamped down over his knuckles. He felt a ridiculous urge to relax and take careful note of this intimate contact with the unknown. After all, a person, personality, creature who holds your hand must have some good intentions, no matter how misdirected they may be. But of course he had forgotten the original purpose of a handshake, which, as every well-informed schoolboy knows, was intended to immobilize the sword arm. When the cold fingers were once again drawn down across his throat, his right hand jerked, then struggled like a captive moth. The fingers caressed his windpipe, raised a forefinger, and gently tickled his chin, then withdrew until only the tips remained to beat out a soft tattoo on his jugular vein. Paul could hear his heart thumping, the rustle of bedclothes when his right foot moved, and the voice of Miss Partridge, who was demanding a progress report. "What is happening? Have you come to grips yet?" The fingers moved swiftly, became as 5 little legs racing across a white plain, creating a trail of dry coldness that again stirred slumbering memories that had first erupted into shuddering life so very long ago. Then 4 fingers nestled down on one side of the windpipe, the thumb found a convenient position on the other, and together, working like a well-organized team, they squeezed. The brain lost control, sent a stream of conflicting commands along the nerve grid, causing legs to thrash and trapped hand to jerk, the voice to gurgle, and the free hand to rise up into belated action. It closed over the cold fingers, thick, muscular, that were tightly fastened on their chosen objective, and no amount of pulling or prising could move so much as a single digit. Not that the pressure was more than a gentle pressing of the windpipe, as though it were necessary for the invisible being to build up strength before pressing on to the next stage. Paul's left hand slid from the fingers and found a thick, hairy wrist, then progressed up to what seemed to be a leather sleeve. Higher up was a bulky shoulder, then a large protruding ear, then, finally, a straggling, greasy beard. It was like a hedge protecting another throat, a mass of tangled, tough, almost wire-like hair that was jerked from side to side, while from above came a series of little pig squeals. Desperation is the father of ingenuity, and Paul grabbed a handful of this hirsute growth and pulled. The head came down, like an oval patch of deeper darkness, some 6 inches away from his face, and there was a suggestion of glaring eyes, white saucers surrounding glowing sparks. Then his right hand was free, and he was able to push it under that matted beard, and a great fierce joy came to him when fingers and thumb found a scrawny throat, and it was not important that there were now 10 icy clamps gouging his own neck, that a mighty roaring filled his brain, 1,000 stars danced before his eyes. He was fighting back, pressing, squeezing, carrying out Miss Partridge's instructions, certain that his young, vigorous body must triumph over the foul creature that squealed and danced a mad reel on the bedside rug. Suddenly, it was all over. One last, high-pitched scream, a feeling of slimy dampness, and Paul's hands came together as though in supplication, and there was a total absence of sound or substance, no crash of falling body, no thud of retreating footsteps, only the memory of what might have been. Paul lay on his bed of terror and tried to peer through the mists that hide the face of truth, while he waited for his heart to resume its normal beat. Presently he got out of bed, and after stumbling from one item of furniture to another, found his jacket hanging over a chair back. The flame of a cigarette lighter made a tiny hole in the darkness, but 2 ornamental candles on the mantelpiece sent flickering yellow spears across the room, chased shadows into corners, and reluctantly, or so it seemed, illuminated the crumpled bedside rug. Paul walked to the door and whimpered his plaintive plea. "Please, Miss Partridge, let me out. I did what you asked. I squeezed, I did. Oh, merciful God, I did." No answer. No welcoming sound of a key being inserted into a lock. Just the sound of a window frame, trembling before the rough wooing of a rising wind. Paul looked back across the candle-lit room and saw the heavy chairs, the mahogany wardrobe and the dressing-table, and tried to decide which would make the best battering ram. The dressing-table, after the loss of 3 legs, finally shattered one panel, and then it was a simple matter to reach out and turn the key, which Miss Partridge had thoughtfully left in the lock. Paul raised one candle over his head, opened the door, took 2 steps out onto the landing, then stopped. For a while he could only stare, making little crying sounds, like those of a child who has seen too much and is mourning the passing of ignorance. Miss Partridge lay upon the floor, her eyes frozen lakes of horror, with 10 blue marks on her throat and a smear of blood on her chin. It was reasonable to suppose she had been strangled.